Cricket Australia. Well, we don't often talk cricket, as I said before the news at this time of the year, but CA's on the hunt for a new chief executive. The resignation yesterday of Nick Hockley. Now, Hockley was appointed interim CEO in June 2020 and the permanent one a year after that. He'll formally depart in March next year after a pretty tumultuous period in charge. We defer to Peter Lawler in moments like these. At least I know Jared would. And Peter, as I welcome you in, you've undergone some change too, I believe. You've gone and launched a website.
yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean, Gideon Haigh and I had the best jobs in the world, didn't we, at the Australian? But now we've kind of branched off and we're doing our own thing. Out in the, we're a bit like David Warner, torn up our Australian contract and gone into franchise cricket. It's a pretty stupid thing to do. We're living off cat food and dry biscuits, but it's fun. We're doing podcasts, doing a sort of Substack where people can subscribe, and lots of people have come on board. This kind of thing. Mate, I work with Gideon Haigh. I was thinking about this before. You know, not many of us got to be alive. Well, no, not many of us were alive when Don Bradman was around, but we're all alive when Gideon Haig's around, and he's an exceptional cricket writer. So, if you're gonna hang around with anyone in the project, hang around with Gideon, I reckon, or someone like him.
Yeah, you're in very good hands there. But Pete, you better give us the details. Like, how do we find? What's the website called?
Yeah.
Come on, if you're going to monetize this, you better turn salesman.
Well, we used to have a podcast called Cricket Etc., but the Australian wouldn't let us take that with us. So we now have one called Cricket et al. Cricket et, new word al. Cricket et al.
Cricket et al. Okay. Righto.
Yeah, et al. You can call it al. Yeah, whatever it is.
Banana.
It's a website. It's a podcast. But
love it.
Should be listening to you, Sam, this morning. But when they're finished with you, they can listen to it.
No, I had a surf around it last night. I read your piece on Nick Hockley. So for those who haven't read that, I mean, how do you assess the Hockley reign? It's certainly always a scrutinised seat that he was occupying anyway.
Always highly scrutinised seat. And I heard you say that it was a tumultuous time. I disagree. I reckon Nick Hockley and Mike Baird poured oil on troubled waters when it came to Australian cricket. If you look at that, and that's what I wrote in the Cricket et al. Piece, if you look at that sort of period around the resignation of the last CEO and the last chair, it was chaos. It was, Cricket Australia was in a mess. Kevin Roberts didn't survive COVID. We just had the cultural review. We had the sandpaper disaster. In years previous, we'd had the MOU. The players hated the administrators. The relationship was as bad as it ever had been. In the years under Nick, since he came on board, he has worked very hard, along with Todd Greenberg at the Players Association, to calm that down, to restore relationships with the players. They've been reasonably successful on the field. They haven't been totally successful, but the men's team alone, World Test Championship, couple of World Cups, Women World Cups, Commonwealth Games. The game's in a pretty good state. I think if Nick had one flaw, it was a very public flaw, and your listeners would be all too familiar with it. It was that he could not articulate any message or answer, and he struggled to answer questions in a live setting. The guy froze around a microphone. Very, very good in the office. Very, very good. I was talking to the board members. I say outstanding at that kind of stuff, at presenting to the board. Live interviews was not his strength, never was, and he never really got much better at it. But in a funny way, that clouds people's perceptions of him.
Yeah, he was never really comfortable in the public eye, was he? And it did great with some, as you touched on there, that when he was in the public eye. The reason I say tumultuous is, and not to say that all of it was necessarily his doing, Pete, or even badly handled by Nick. It was just some of the things you don't realise until you go back and have a look that he had to confront. So he had COVID-19, which is massive. Listeners might have heard of that. Then he had the Tim Payne saga. He had Justin Langer's departure. He had David Warner's eligibility for the captaincy. Then he had the Seven West Media showdown over the TV rights discount, as they were arguing. So I thought it had been a full plate. Some not well handled, some well handled, but there was basically never a dull moment.
It's a reasonable argument that you mount. it's a reasonable argument that came out altogether, yeah. And as I said, COVID-19 sort of ended Kevin Roberts, didn't it? That's how he basically stepped into the job, and they navigated their way out of there. He took them, as I mentioned in the piece, he took them to Pakistan. He and Baird and this new administration opened Australia up where it had been a bit self-serving and self-centred and timid, frankly. That earned a lot of respect in the cricket world. Taking the players to Pakistan was an outstanding thing to do. As I wrote in the piece too, that Tim Payne scenario was, it was not of cricket's making, and you can argue many sides of that. The board had judged it once before and cleared him. A new board backflipped on that. Once it had gone down, Nick Hockley was the guy who got on a plane and went down there and had a quiet chat with Tim and sort of sorted things out behind the scenes. Tim has now quietly come back to Australian cricket. He's helping out with some coaching around the under-19s and things like that, and doing a fantastic job for SEN down in Tasmania, as I'm sure you noticed. Langer, but it could have been handled better, and Langer definitely could have been handled better. The David Warner thing, could have been handled better too. Seven West Media, they ended up signing a $1.5 billion broadcast deal in June, didn't they?
I must admit, I still am no close to understanding this one. They wanted so in layman's terms, Pete, they wanted a discount, given the pandemic, but the pandemic didn't cost them any cricket.
Well, there was a number of arguments going on there, and I've kind of forgotten most of them.
Yeah. No, I'm
a lot
probably
of it was around the BBL underperforming, wasn't it? And not delivering on what they'd been promised in their broadcast deal, and they moaned and complained. And there has been a sort of a big re-engineering of the BBL, hasn't there? Cal surprised, they realised that they were playing too many games. And I think that relationship with the broadcasters has repaired somewhat. Channel 7 played a blinder there, by the way. I mean, they got themselves a better deal, and they retained the cricket rights. It was ugly for a while, but seems to be the way of business, Sam. Lucky we're in journalism, mate. We don't have to deal with that sort of stuff.
You're right, though. He did tick a lot of boxes too. You mentioned Pakistan, first time in quarter of a century they'd been there. Retained the women's Ashes, retained the men's Ashes. There were multiple World Cups along the way. Commonwealth Games gold, of course, and the Under-19s World Cup along the way, I think earlier this year as well. So, and he was determined almost, I don't know, Pete, almost to a fault to build a better relationship with the players. But did he do that, you think?
Yes, I think he did. If you compare and contrast, I mean, the low water mark between of the relationship between the players and administration was that MOU dispute, and the scars from that were massive. And that Steve Smith and David Warner had been at the forefront of that and were still around, and I think Hockley knew from the get-go, and in fact the new board knew too. They really had to work closely with those players. You got to watch those players. I mean, they're going to take you for a ride if you ask them what they want. But that relationship is better, and cricket's in a better place because it is. I think the players trust them a little bit more than they used to. It was an incredibly hostile relationship post that MOU dispute, and for years and years afterwards. And took a lot of repairing, but it had to be repaired because you can't conduct a sport when your participants are so hostile to your administrators.
So Nick he'll formally depart those Jolimont offices in March, obviously, Pete. So I won't try to pin you to who the replacement is going to be, but just some of the usual suspects on the shortlist, if you like. I mean, who's in the conversation, or who should be in the conversation to take the job?
Well, there's a bloke called Allsop who's been at cricket, and he's their chief of cricket now. He seems to be sort of, probably the next in line to some degree. There's Christina Matthews, who I've been a huge fan of, and I think was one of the best cricket administrators over in the West. The boys' club over there don't agree with me on that, but she got Western Australian cricket in a great place and recently stood down, but I think I don't know that they would look to her. Some people are talking about Steph Beltrami, who did all the recent broadcast deals, including the one with SEN. Would she want that job? She's recently left Cricket Australia. there's the left of field Todd Greenberg over there at the Cricketers Association, worked in lockstep with Hockley on lots and lots of issues. Is respected, would be good at the job. Hey, and he's articulate too.
Yeah, he's very good in the public space. Absolutely. Did I see Alistair Dobson, boss of the Big Bash leagues, mentioned? Would he be a chance as well?
Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. Alistair Dobson's beloved by the broadcasters, I reckon. Yep. I reckon the job he's done with the Big Bash is really appreciated, and that sort of partnership that he built up with them, because, as you mentioned earlier, it was toxic for a while there, wasn't it? There was quite a bit of conflict. It's a lot better now, and the Big Bash is in a better state now, in a very competitive environment, you have to argue.
Oh, is it ever? Yeah, ever competitive around the world. We're with Peter Lawler. So, Pete, it feels like only 5 minutes ago we were watching Graham Thorpe actually bat out in the middle in an Ashes series. I'm not sure if I'm showing my age here, but the news that he'd passed at the age of 55 has just floored the cricket world.
Oh, it's such a very sad story, isn't it, Sam? And look, I'm showing my age. I remember his first 200s because both of them were made against Australia. He was brought into that Ashes series where they were getting beaten up, and he made 100 on debut. Then he came out here, made another great 100 at Perth against a sort of callow Glenn McGrath, who probably wasn't the bowler then that he is now, but really good blue-collar batter, wasn't he? Went hard, was aggressive, never really comfortable in England cricket. And sadly, I suspect a man never really comfortable in his own skin. Battled a lot. Mike Atherton said he's never seen a sportsman more affected by what's going on in his outside life, in that if things weren't going well for Graham, he couldn't make runs, and things often weren't going well for Graham because he fell victim of his own indiscretions, but a tabloid sting, and someone revealed he was philandering on tour, and his wife left him, and things like that, and that weighed very heavily on him. And there was a sense he was a man in trouble when he came out here with England on the last Ashes tour. I mean, and England were a team in trouble too. They really battled on that tour, but he was struggling, and he was an interesting character. He could be he was abrasively cheeky. I mean, the fact that he, when the police were called to them celebrating too hard or commiserating too hard, probably in Hobart at the end of that series, everyone ran for the door. He filmed it. Sat there smoking a cigar and filmed it. It was a real up view, but great cricketer. People who were his mates really liked him. Very well respected in English cricket, and probably should have achieved more. But a very, very good batsman. Just a sad situation. So many of these sort of stories around sport, aren't there? Around cricket. Cricket seems to let a lot of this got too much space. It's too much sadness in sometimes, I think, and rotten to see a guy like that go so young.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's frighteningly young. 100 tests, 6,744 runs, an average of 44.66, the 16 centuries, a couple of which Pete just touched on. So, Peter Lawler, Gideon Haigh. I mean, the Australians' loss is the World Wide Web's big gain. A couple of real handy free agents plying their trade. So that website again, Pete, cricketetall.com. We'll direct people to that for all their cricketing goodness. We wish you well with it.
I owe you lunch, mate. Thanks for the plug.
No worries.